after spiritual abuse, after religious trauma, after deep hurt in the church, how in the world do you begin to heal? How do you begin to heal in a way that you overcome what has happened to you and that you can begin to move forward in your life? You can begin to re-engage with the church. And for some of us, the question you may be asking is, how can I heal so I can re-engage with my faith with Jesus? Because the truth is, your relationship with Jesus can feel different after spiritual abuse and religious trauma. It's not because Jesus did anything to you. It's not because Jesus loves you any less, but it's because of some of our trauma responses. It can all of a sudden make things like prayer and worship and Bible reading feel very different. And it's something that I hear from a whole lot of people. They say, Jeff, I want to heal because not only do I want to be able to move forward in my trauma responses, not only do I want to get control back of my life or re-engage with church, but I want to have that same prayer life that I used to have with the Lord, or I want to be able to enjoy my Bible study time again. So if any of those things are struggles that you're having after spiritual abuse or religious trauma, then this video is going to be for you, because we're going to talk about how you can heal from those things. And there's a lot to this. In our table groups, we spend 10 to 12 months walking through healing, 90 minutes every month with a lot of homework after that. So this is a deep process. Can't cover everything in answering this question in the video today, but what I am going to try to do is answer as much of it as I can to help you begin to move forward right where you're at. So how can you overcome spiritual abuse and religious trauma? And how can you begin to identify kind of healthy movements and healthy rhythms for yourself again in the church? So I want to give you 4 steps today. 4 steps to begin healing abuse. And again, these will be a little bit oversimplified, but they're going to help you begin to take steps, okay? And that's the thing about healing from any sort of trauma. You don't have to know the whole journey. You don't have to know every step that you're going to take. What's important is that you know the next step or the next couple of steps to take, and you just begin taking steps right where you're at to heal. Because here's what I know, none of us that have been through spiritual abuse and religious trauma, nobody wants to stay right where you are, okay? Because that is a painful, painful place. So these steps may just be some of your first steps. They're going to give you some kind of big chunk steps to take. So not only what do I do today, but based on where you're at as you hear these steps, what can I do next after that? And of course, we'll continue sharing more content to help you with the in-between. So always share those questions that you have. Now, in the chat right now, somebody said, I haven't been able to pray or read the word the same ever since spiritual abuse. And that's exactly what I was talking about a moment ago. That's the kind of effect that spiritual abuse and religious trauma can have on you. It took me years to be able to find my love for scripture again, because there was almost this block and I hated it, because the word, reading the word, is one of the most powerful ways that I connect with Jesus. So having a few years where that was different, that was painful. For others, it's their prayer life is very, very different. So whatever you're going through, again, I'm hoping that these steps to healing, they actually help you to reclaim the power of your faith, okay? Somebody else said, yes, please tell me. It's hard not to get triggered, and getting over your triggers, being able to regain control of your triggers, that's something we talk about a lot in table groups. This will begin to help you with that process, but that's a long process. I just want to encourage you, if you're still dealing with triggers where you go, man, certain things happen, I hear a certain song, I see a certain person, anything reminds me, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm kind of out of control and I'm triggered. I just want to encourage you to be patient with yourself as well, okay? That does take time. None of us like it, but be patient with yourself, because as we step into these 4 steps, before we jump in, I do just want to remind you, Jesus is patient with you in your healing. He sees you exactly where you are. He is not in a hurry. He knows the depth of the pain that you went through. So I want to help you heal. I know that you want to heal, and I know that Jesus wants you to heal, but I do want to encourage you. You don't have to be in a hurry with that. Just celebrate. Every day that you're taking a step toward healing is a good day and a day worth celebrating. And not only am I proud of you every day you take toward healing, every step you take toward healing, but God is proud of you for that. So let's jump in. What are the 4 steps that you can take to begin healing from spiritual abuse and religious trauma? The first one is very simple. Define it. Define what it was that happened to you. And here's what I mean. There's all these different words. Like you hear me doing it in these videos. Different people need different words to describe what they went through. Okay. This question actually was originally posed as how can I overcome church hurt? Now, I try to talk about things more as spiritual abuse and religious trauma than church hurt. I do talk about both because not everybody believes what they went through was spiritual abuse, yet it was still deep church hurt. There are other people who think when we use the term church hurt, that we're just diminishing what they went through when they experienced religious trauma or spiritual abuse. And I think all of those are good terms that we need to reclaim and not let pastors who misuse them, okay? Pastors who say things like they talk about spiritual abuse, religious trauma, deep sin, and they call it, quote, church hurt, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. That's the damage that's done. I think we need to reclaim these terms though, okay? Because whether it's these terms or another one, I think the first step toward healing is defining what happened to you. What happened to you and what was it to you? Okay. When I went from saying what happened to me was when I went from saying it was church hurt to saying I was spiritually abused and suffered religious trauma because of the behaviors of my spiritual abusers, that was a huge step in my healing. Okay. Because I needed to say that. Okay. Not only that, I needed to be able to define what exactly was the spiritual abuse. Why was it spiritual abuse? And if you need help with that, check out our spiritual abuse checklist. It's on the resources tab of the SAI website, spiritualabuse.institute. It gives you some of the 20 most common signs of spiritual abuse. And that can help you as you're walking through what happened to you to really be able to point your fingers on, hey, there was a lot of hurt here, but what exactly was the abuse if it was abuse? Maybe you wouldn't call what you went through spiritual abuse, but you still have religious trauma from it. And you say, I don't even know if it was abuse or hurt, but what I do know is I experienced trauma because of it, because of how it was handled. So if this makes sense, step number one is simply to define because no one else gets to define this for you. Okay. This is your experience. What happened? Okay. Define what that was. Was it deep church hurt? Was it spiritual abuse? Was it chronic spiritual abuse that you didn't recognize? Was it religious trauma and spiritual abuse, or just trauma from an experience? Was it trauma from the experience, or was it religious trauma because of how your church handled the experience, right? There's different answers to this for all of us, but the first step to healing is to define what happened to you. Because if you don't define what it was, okay, it's going to be hard to get your hands around it, get your arms around it, and to begin to heal from it because there's all sorts of terms that are out there. Okay. So again, for me, the first step in really beginning to heal, I remember sitting with my therapist and getting to the point to where I said it was spiritual abuse that I went through. It was religious trauma that came from not only the spiritual abuse, but the religious trauma deepened in me when the responses to the spiritual abuse. When I tried to talk to people and get help, and then their responses were to dismiss me, their responses were to call me divisive, their responses was to overlook sin of the people who abused me and then call it sin that I was asking questions and calling it out. That made the trauma worse. And then the biggest breakthrough for me in defining it, and this is one that's hard to do on your own, but again, I was doing this with a therapist at the time because I didn't have a YouTube channel like this. I didn't have a community of people to help me understand what these things were. But I remember my therapist helping me to understand, hey, Jeff, a lot of the symptoms that you're having from this trauma, it's not just trauma. It looks a lot like the PTSD that you already have from your childhood. And the reality is, I was actually having post traumatic stress disorder symptoms from what I went through in the church, and they were overlapping with what happened to me in my childhood, which was causing ridiculous triggering responses. Okay. So sometimes in defining this, you may realize, oh, I can define everything myself. And now there's like a sense of being able to breathe out because I finally said the thing. For others, you may say, I defined it and that's helpful, but I still have a lot of questions and concerns. I'm not sure how to define this. And it may be a good indicator for you that you need to work through that with someone like a therapist. Okay. There's no right and wrong way to do this as long as you are defining what was it that I went through? What did I experience in that? Okay. So step number one to healing from spiritual abuse is to define what happen to you. Step number two is to distance yourself from it. Okay. And sometimes people do this first. You may have done this, but never defined it. We have other people who define it, but then they don't do this part. Okay. So I'm giving you the order that I think is most helpful. But at the same time, a lot of us, man, spiritual abuse is messy. So you may be out of this order, and that's totally okay. All right. But number two is distance yourself from it. A lot of times when we start realizing we're in a spiritually abusive environment, one of the first responses from Christians is, I want to fix it. I want to help my church. I want to fix my church, right? I want to do something good. That was my wife's response to my spiritual abuse was, hey, you may need to distance yourself from it, but I want to make a change because I believe our church can be better, right? Eventually, she got to a point where she had to distance herself from it as well, okay? Here's the thing, though. We may want to really, really help. And all the work that I do now is to help people heal and to help churches get safer. But the issue is, I couldn't do that until I took time to distance myself from it. Okay, defining it was only part of the issue. And I had distanced myself from part of the spiritual abuse, but was actually still on staff when I first started trying to heal. It took me leaving church staff and leaving ministry because I had to distance myself from not just the church and the leaders that spiritually abuse me. And again, every case is different. So this doesn't mean that this is the case for you. But for me, I had been so involved in ministry systems and ministry for so long, I had to distance myself from it completely. And I had to start attending a church that was a very different expression of church, a very different feel of church from what I had been in most of my life, because I just kind of needed a clean break, not from God, but from all of those things that were reminding me of my trauma. So I could take that time to define it, distance myself from it, and get perspective. I actually went for a while from being a part of a evangelical non-denominational megachurch to a much smaller Pentecostal, very kind of hyper expressive church, because for me, I just needed a change of scenery, but I had to distance myself from a couple of things. What are you distancing yourself from? Number one, you have to distance yourself from that abuser. Okay. Whoever, or if it's multiple people, the people who are abusing you and causing you trauma, you cannot let them to continue to cause you trauma and hurt. Okay. And in some situations, it's rare, but in some situations, that's family. Okay. And I know that's hard, but if you don't distance yourself from it, you can't heal because the trauma is layering. Okay. It's one trauma and another trauma and another trauma, because until they're willing to repent and do something about it, that it's not going to change. Okay. So you got to distance yourself from it so that you can stop receiving trauma before you can start healing. Okay. You got to stop being spiritually abused before you can start healing from spiritual abuse. Okay. But you may have to distance yourself from certain systems, from certain expressions of church, right? Because they're so triggering to you. Right. That's why I had to go to a different style of church. And then not long after that, about a year after that, I went to a different style of church, a very, very small, non charismatic church, but was also very different from the non denominational church. And that's kind of where I landed. Okay. I had to find an expression of church that allowed me to walk in health. Okay. So, first, define what happened to you. Second, distance yourself from the people, the abusers, the systems, and even the things, if you have to, that are reminding you of that and triggering you. Because here's the thing, we're always going to be triggered and have certain trauma responses after any sort of abuse or any sort of trauma. Okay. The key is to get control over that. The key is to get to a point to where you know how to respond when you get triggered and you don't feel hijacked and you lose control. Okay. But also, there's a point before we learn all that where we have to distance ourselves from those things, because when you don't know how to handle those traumatic responses, those triggering responses, then you're in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. And guys, it is almost impossible to heal from spiritual abuse and trauma if you are in the process of being triggered and feel like you're right back in that trauma. Okay. You can't heal in fight, flight, or freeze mode. You have to heal in a mode where you feel safe, in an environment where you feel safe. So when we talk about defining what happened to you, that's one thing. Distancing yourself from the spiritual abuse literally means this: what do I need to do to get away from the things, the people, the systems, the places that are making me feel unsafe? And what do I need to do to get enough distance to where I feel safe enough to process what's happening? and safe enough to heal. Okay. So define what happened to you, distance yourself from it. And that's just something that we so easily miss because we don't distance ourselves from the abuse and then we never get out of that cycle. Okay. But the third thing can really only happen once you've defined what happened to you and once you've distanced yourself from the abuse and the unsafe environments. But step number three to healing from spiritual abuse, religious trauma, and deep church hurt, it's to process it. Okay. Processing what happened to you is very different than defining what happened to you. Okay. Processing it is I'm not just defining it. I'm gonna open this up. I'm gonna open up some of these bad memories. Okay. I'm gonna open up this tough stuff that I want to just forget. I'm gonna open it up knowing it's gonna be uncomfortable. Okay. Because I need to process it. And instead of just thinking about what happened to me, I need to really process what's happening in me because of what happened to me. Okay, does that make sense? It's one thing to say, "Oh, this thing happened to me. It's in the past. I just want to get away from it. I want to escape it." Well, we can't really ever escape it until we process it. And in processing it, we realize because of what happened to me, what is now happening in me and what needs to happen in me as I move forward. And if you've been through spiritual abuse, you know this when you first start trying to tell your story, doesn't it almost always come out like super wonky and sideways? And you're like, man, I know what happened up here. But when I try to tell other people, it's man, I sound like a crazy person. Things are out of order. They're all out of line. And I'm having a hard time remembering certain things. And it's because if we don't process the trauma, if we don't process those bad memories, then they're going to set deeper as trauma. Okay. One of the ways that we actually overcome trauma is processing trauma. Okay. So process it. And process it can look like a lot of different things, but processing it can't happen on your own. Okay. Processing what happened, you can do part of that on your own, but you can't fully process it on your own. So whether it's a trusted friend that you can be completely honest with about what happened to you, okay, and they're not going to give you all the spiritual platitudes and the spiritual bypassing and make you feel bad about yourself, okay. If it's a friend, that's okay. If it's your spouse, that's okay. If it's a trusted pastor at another church, that's okay. Although keep in mind, for a lot of spiritual abuse victims, you're not going to feel comfortable with that pastor. Some people will. Okay. It can't be the pastor that abused you, but is there a trusted pastor? If you don't have anybody else that you trust, I would recommend this: process it with a therapist, process it with a counselor. Because the beautiful thing, okay, and not everybody likes therapy. This isn't for everybody. I totally get that. But if you don't have anybody else to process with, a therapist can't legally tell anybody else what you've said as long as it's not going to cause you harm or somebody else harm. Okay. So you can go in there and you can be completely honest about what you feel and not worry about someone judging you or judging your faith or judging where you're at. It means you don't have to always have the right words. So I have found therapy incredibly helpful over the years. But whoever you process this with, okay, you got to find somebody that you trust in a place you can trust where you can process it and give yourself time. Okay. Don't take a 20-minute, coffee or 30-minute lunch to tell somebody this. Okay. Carve out, an hour to 2 hours at a time to process these things with follow up because it's going to take a while. Okay. It's going to take a while to get all of this jumble of what happened to you, what you felt, your experiences to get it out. But when you process it, you can begin to move from what happened to me to what's happening in me. Okay. And once you process it, this is the beautiful part too. If you've never heard of EMDR is a type of therapy. It's not your normal therapy, but it's basically a type of therapy where they use kind of the same thing that's going on in your brain with REM sleep. Okay, rapid eye movement. They use that to help you process a traumatic memory, but process it in a way where you realize I'm not in that unsafe place again. For lack of a better term, put that memory back in its proper place, that this is something that happened to me, but it's now every time I remember it, it's not happening to me again. Okay. So that's one way that people process trauma, where they're having a hard time telling what happened to them. They're having a hard time even remembering all of those things. Um, EMDR can help you do that through rapid eye movement. And then when your brain thinks about that trauma again, it doesn't put you in fight, flight, or freeze. It's just a memory. Yes, this bad thing happened to me, but I processed it. I put it in its proper place, and I can open that drawer and look at what happened to me. I can learn from it. I can remember it, but I can also close that drawer and know that I am in a safe place right now. Okay. So, whatever that looks like for you, though, find someone that you can trust and begin to process it, because until you process what happened to you and put it in that drawer where it belongs, okay, and begin to move forward out of that experience instead of still feeling like you're living in that experience, it's going to feel like chains are on you that are holding you down. And it's like, it, all I want to do is move forward. All I want to do is heal. Yet every day you wake up feeling like you're chained to that trauma, feeling like you're chained to that memory, feeling like you're chained to that church or that spiritual abuser or that pastor or that friend who hurt you, right? How do we unlock those chains? Well, we begin to process it. And we begin to process what happened. You unlock one, you unlock the other, and you get some freedom. Okay. And then the last step, the fourth step, after you've defined it, you've distanced yourself from it, you've done the hard work to process it, which again can take a lot of time, you begin to tell the truth. Okay. And until you fully processed it, it's hard to tell the truth about it because the truth may be different in certain spots and even how you feel. Okay. But many of us, what we hear is this: we get hurt in a church, we experience spiritual abuse, and we're told to be quiet or to spin it or to not share certain things because we don't want to hurt the body of Christ. We don't want to sow discord. We don't want to cause division. We don't want to cause people who don't know Jesus to never come to Jesus. And you get a lot of spiritual leaders and a lot of other Christians who say all those things, and they put a really heavy burden on you. Okay. The reality is, we have to get to a point to where we can tell the truth without being bitter and without being angry, but we can just tell the honest truth about what happened to us before we're walking in freedom. And the reason why this is the last step is because when you complete this last step, most people I know who can tell the truth without getting emotionally hijacked, okay, without like totally feeling like they're in that place all over again, that can tell the truth and go, yeah, this happened to me. That was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. I don't want to see that happen to anybody else again. I'm glad that I got out, right? People who can tell that truth and stay emotionally regulated, that is usually a sign that's a healed person in front of you. Okay. It took me a long time to get to that place. And it took a long time of after I processed it, practicing telling the truth about it until one day I realized, gosh, I can tell that truth. I can tell that truth simply and easily. I'm not emotionally hijacked by it anymore. I can tell that truth. And instead of being angry and bitter, have empathy for the abusers and just man, their life is sad to me. Okay. And that empathy was a total shift. It was surprising, right? Didn't mean that I say what you're doing is okay. Far from it. It's never okay. You need to deal with it, right? But as those emotions changed, I no longer felt chained. Okay. And that's what I want for you too. So the first step is to healing from spiritual abuse is define it. The second step is distance yourself from it. The third step is to process it, move from what happened to you to what's happening in you and through you. And then the last step is to tell the truth about it. And when you get to that point where you can easily tell the truth about it without emotional hijacking, without significant trauma responses, that's when you know you're beginning to walk in healing. But I want to give you a little bit more information about what it looks like, a few tips about telling the truth about what happened to you. Okay. When you tell the truth, there's really three truths to healing from religious trauma. These are three truths to religious trauma healing. And again, we go much more in depth into these in our table groups. Stay tuned. We're going to have some announcements. I'm working on some stuff with our board and with other volunteers to figure out how we can get more people in table groups. We're maxed out right now at 7 groups, but we're working on some things that would allow hundreds of people to go through this curriculum and really walk you through this process. Okay. But one of the things we talk about in table groups that is supremely helpful, we spend 4 weeks on the 3 truths of trauma healing. Okay. And practicing that. But here are those 3 truths. And until you tell the truth about these 3 things, it's going to be almost impossible to heal or to fully heal and walk in freedom from spiritual abuse. The first truth you got to tell, it's the truth about what happened to you. Okay. And that's the easiest one to tell, but it takes practice because again, it comes out wonky. It comes out sideways. Even after you process it, it can be hard to put everything into words. So the first truth is the truth of what happened to you. And you may start telling that truth somewhere in between processing and telling the truth about it. Step 3 and step 4. Okay. The next 2 steps get progressively more uncomfortable, but they're important. Okay. And again, if you need help walking through this, just start telling the truth about what happened when you're ready. Go to the next one. If you get stuck on any, walk through this with a counselor or therapist or join a table group. Again, my hope is that we're able to actually open another window in the spring. Okay. So stay tuned for that. But the first truth is what happened to you. The second truth gets a little harder. The third truth gets quite a bit harder. Okay. But they're necessary. The second truth is you moving from what happened to me. I need to tell the truth about what I felt and what I feel now when I think about that trauma. Okay. So, what did I feel when I went through that trauma? And you want to be really specific. It's not, did I feel happy, sad, or mad? And when I went through religious trauma and spiritual abuse, that was kind of how I described emotions. I was not a very emotional person. I didn't like talking about my emotions. I was kind of a robot, guys. People knew if somebody's crying in the room around me, I'm running. I don't want to be around emotional people. I don't want to be around crying. I don't want to be around any of that. After walking through this, now I'll cry at the drop of a hat. I'll cry in a movie. I don't care. And part of that is because I was able to overcome some of my trauma with this. Okay. But when I first started trying to do this, I struggled because the only feelings that I knew how to describe was I'm happy, sad, or mad. Okay. That's what it is. But the reality is, there are many, many feelings and emotions that we can walk through. And I'll never forget the first time that I saw, and you can search one of these up. We actually share one that I really like in our table group curriculum. But the first time I looked at a feelings wheel or an emotions wheel, I was overwhelmed by how many emotions there were because I was like, I don't think I've felt all of these. This feels really woo woo. But again, I had a therapist who said, hey, you need to dig into this. You need to dig into this. Let's dive down deep. What did you actually feel? Well, I was really mad. I was really mad when I felt like that friend betrayed me, that pastor, that authority figure. I thought they were like a spiritual father. I thought they were like a friend, and they betrayed me, and I was mad. And he said, "You weren't mad. Go deeper." And I went deeper, and I went deeper. And every time he would say, "Is that it, or do you need to go deeper?" And well, the reality is, I got down to this place to where it was like I didn't feel mad. I felt utterly betrayed. Okay. I felt the deep sting of betrayal. That's the feeling that caused that. Okay. Well, what else did you feel? And we would trace each feeling. Okay. So this isn't just simple. Did I feel angry or sad or happy or mad or any of those? This is getting real in depth, telling the truth. What did I feel? And you may have 20, 30 emotions that are tightly bundled up. And as you begin to tell the truth about those emotions, it's like the knots in your stomach begin to unravel, and it's like that sickness and that nausea in your stomach begins to unravel because you've finally told the truth about what you felt, what you're feeling now, which is a whole different question because what you felt in the moment and what you're feeling now, those are two very different things. But here's the real key part to that: you don't just tell the truth about it, you finally allow yourself to feel it in a safe place. Because again, you defined what happened to you got to a safe place, you distance yourself from it, you begin to process it. Well, now you're allowing yourself to feel it because you couldn't allow yourself to feel it in fight, flight, or freeze. You just had to stay safe. Now that you allow yourself to feel it, it's like that religious trauma and those trauma responses begin to melt away. But here's the final one. Okay. And I'm gonna give you a warning. People hate this one. Most people hate this one, but I'm telling you it's important. So don't just click off the video. Don't get angry. Please hear me out. The first truth, step number 4, we're telling the truth about it. The first truth of religious trauma healing. What happened to me? Okay. What happened? The second, what did I feel? And what did I feel? And what do I feel now? The last one, tell the truth about what God says about your abuser. I know you don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like telling people about that one, but it's so important. Tell the truth about what God says about your abuser. And I won't go deep into this because, again, this is one that I would encourage you, don't do this one alone. Do this one in a place like table groups or with a therapist or with some sort of practitioner who has experience with this, because this can open up Pandora's box. So I'm telling you, this is something you will need to do. I'm also warning you, please don't do this alone because it can put you in a really bad spot or it can be a struggle. So you want to have somebody here to help you do this, okay? But there's power in telling the truth about what God says about your abuser, because we have to do two things. One, in order to tell that truth, we have to put God back in his rightful place. And for many of us, whether we acknowledge it or not, because it makes us feel bad when we say it, but there's a part of our bodies, a part of just our DNA, a part of our trauma responses that almost feels like it distrusts God because it was his people and his church who hurt us. And we know up here that we can trust God. We know up here that God is loving, but we don't always feel it here when we step back into the church. So the first thing this does, telling the truth about what God says about your abuser, is it puts God back in his rightful spot. God is loving. God is forgiving. God created that person in his image the same way he created me in his image. But we also know that God is full of justice. God is full of justice, and he hates sin, and he hates when his kids are mistreated. And he's full of mercy, which is, we love it with us and we don't love it with other people. And he's full of forgiveness, yet he holds people accountable, right? And then we have to remember that God is a good father. And just like you are a son or daughter of God, that abuser is a son or daughter of God. But God is full of so much justice that he doesn't cover for his children in those moments. And what it does is it makes us have some real uncomfortable conversations that put God back in his rightful place. Okay. The second thing that it does is it puts your abuser in their rightful place. And again, I know you're probably not liking this so far. Stay with me. Okay. When you tell the truth about your abuser, they lose authority over you. Okay. It's one of the easiest ways for them to lose authority and power over you. Because I'll tell you, I'll just be completely honest. My abuser had authority over me for a long time. If I thought about him, okay, if I thought about him, I was mad. I was hijacked. I was angry again. If I saw him out in public, man, I was messed up for the rest of the day. Okay. When someone else shared a social media post about him or something he was involved in, all of that would just wreck me. But when I asked the question, and I won't go into deep detail about this, but when I asked that question, the simple answer I got when I asked the question, God, what do you say about my abuser? Here's what I heard the Lord speak into my spirit. When I look at him, I'm sad and I'm heartbroken because he's still just a little boy trying to prove to his dad that he's worthy of love. He's terrified that he's not good enough, that he's not worthy. And instead of operating out of the love I have for him, he's operating out of fear and worry that no one will love him if they know who he really is. And out of that, he's trying to prove to everybody that he's worthy. And not only am I sad that he's doing that, I am heartbroken because his responses out of that are hurting you and my other kids that I deeply love. I deeply love them. And because he's not experiencing the healing I want for him, now he's hurting everybody else. And all I see so much pain and so much destruction because he just doesn't understand that he's already loved and he's already worthy. And as long as he keeps trying to do life in ministry, seeking the approval of others, he's going to be miserable and he's going to continue hurting people. And Jeff, as much as I love him and I want him to come to that truth, I can't make him change because I love him and I've given him free will, just like I don't make you change. But Jeff, I'll tell you this, as much as I love him, he will be held accountable for every person he's mistreating as he doesn't process this, as he doesn't do this work. So pray for him because he's in a really sad place. And you know what? As weird as that was, what it took me from being angry with that person to being, I felt really sorry for him. I felt really sorry for him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's miserable. He's miserable and he's not going to make me miserable anymore. Okay. I'm not going to let someone who's still operating like an 8-year-old kid trying to prove to his daddy that he's worth love. I'm not going to let somebody like that affect my life because I know I'm worthy of love. Okay. So again, it feels so weird to ask that truth about what God feels about your abuser. But when you ask that, it reminded me that God is a God of justice and a God of love. And even though I don't understand it, he wraps all that tension up together and he's still perfectly loving and perfectly pursuing justice, even when I don't understand it. And it released me from that person having authority and power over me. They no longer had any control over me or how I felt or what I did. So I hope that makes sense. That's that third truth. What happened to me? What did I feel? What do I feel now? And then that last truth, what does God say about my abuser? And when you can tell the truth about what happened to you, you can tell the truth about what you felt and what you feel, and you can tell the truth about what God says about your abuser, and you can tell it without being emotionally hijacked. Again, that's a moment where you go, I think I'm walking in healing. I think I've been able to move forward. Okay. And after you tell the truth about those things, the reality is then it's time to start telling the truth in your own conversations and your relationships, because you're not going to come across as bitter at all. You're going to come across as caring for those people, not only the people who are hurting others, but the people who are being hurt. Okay. And we talked about this in yesterday's live stream. And if you missed it, you can check out this video right here. We'll link that after the stream. But as we discussed yesterday, when you leave a church, part of what you want to do is you want to be honest and honoring at the same time. Honest about what happened, yet honoring and not just trying to get revenge or angry. Well, how can you be honest and honoring? You can be honest and honoring after you process what happened to you and you tell the three truths of trauma healing. That's when it's easiest to be fully honest and fully honoring at the same time. Because when you tell these three truths, the reality is you're going to trade bitterness for sympathy and anger for holy justice and holy love. And it really is like those chains fall off. So now, because you tell those truths, you can be honest and honoring without the bitterness. And even if someone accuses you of being bitter, and that happens to me all the time, you can clearly, confidently, and gently tell them that's not the case at all. I've done the work. I'm not hijacked by this. I'm not angry about this. I'm angry that it keeps happening, right? But I'm in control because I've done the work. And guess what? When someone accuses you of being bitter and you show perfectly, I'm not at all, this isn't affecting me, then they're just going to get really, really upset. And it's going to shake them because they realize they don't have the control over you they thought they were going to gain by saying that. Okay. But because you've done the work, you can tell the truth, you can own it, and you can stand for justice without being hijacked and without the anger and the traumatic responses. The 4 steps to healing from spiritual abuse. Number 1, define what happened. Okay, define it. What was it? Was it spiritual abuse? Was it church hurt? Was it religious trauma? Was it all of those? Was it something else? Step number 2, distance yourself from it. Get away from the abusers and the unsafe environments and the triggering responses long enough to heal. Number 3, process what happened to you and what happened with someone safe in a safe environment. And then number 4, tell the truth about it by telling the 3 specific truths of religious trauma healing. What happened to me? What did I feel? And what do I feel now? And what does God say about my abuser? And when you do that, guys, I'm telling you, you're going to operate and be able to walk in a freedom that you never thought you could. You're going to be able to re-engage with your prayer life like you never thought you could. You're going to be able to fall in love with the Bible again like you never thought you could. You're going to be able to re-engage with a church in a healthy way without expecting the other shoe to drop at any moment. So that's what I want from you. That's what I want for you. And I'm praying that as you walk these steps, that you experience healing like never before. And if you have questions, something I didn't answer, go ahead, pop it in the chat. Ask in the comments. I'll do my very best to answer those questions. And if you want to go farther with these things, stay tuned for more information about our table groups as we expand those. But I'm proud of you. I want to say I'm proud of you already because you're watching this video. I know you want to do the work. So I'm praying that you experience freedom and wisdom as you do the work. But I'm proud of you because you've already taken the first step. And the first step was just to begin to look for, hey, how can I heal? So I'm proud of you and I'm praying for you every step of the way.